War stories shape nations. But what happens when brilliant films about Britain's darkest hour collapse at the box office? Imagine movies filled with daring escapes, secret codes, and acts of defiance, only to vanish into obscurity. Some were censored, some misunderstood, others simply too bleak for audiences of their time. Today, we're unearthing 12 forgotten British WWII gems that flopped but remain astonishing works of art. Number 12. The Way Ahead, 1944. At first glance, this film seemed destined for greatness. Directed by Carol Reed and starring David Niven, The Way Ahead painted a stirring picture of ordinary British men transformed into soldiers. Critics praised its authenticity and morale-building spirit. Yet, despite its craftsmanship, it faltered commercially in later re-releases, overshadowed by Hollywood's grander wartime epics. The premise was simple, yet powerful. Civilians of all stripes, dock workers, clerks, and farmers, thrown together to form a platoon. Their journey, marked by blunders, training struggles, and eventual battlefield courage, captured the essence of Britain's citizen army. But here's the twist. Some argued the film was too realistic, showing bickering and weakness when propaganda demanded only strength. Reports suggest there was unease within the War Office itself. While the film had government approval, whispers claimed censors trimmed certain defeatist moments. Others alleged it felt too small, compared to American spectacles like Sahara or 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. By 1945, audiences seeking victory celebrations didn't want gritty realism. They wanted triumph. Behind the scenes, Reed clashed with producers who feared it lacked glamour. Distribution stumbled, limiting its reach abroad. By the 1950s, it had all but disappeared from public memory. Only later did film historians hail it as one of Britain's most honest depictions of wartime camaraderie. Today, The Way Ahead feels like a time capsule, messy, human, and painfully real. Its box office failure speaks more to timing than talent. And, in its rawness, it dares to whisper a truth others buried. Not every soldier was born a hero. They were made, often reluctantly. Number 11. The Sea Shall Not Have Them, 1954. This gripping naval drama had all the ingredients for success. A stellar cast, including Dirk Bogarde and Michael Redgrave. A suspenseful premise, the desperate effort to rescue downed airmen from the icy North Sea, and a patriotic title taken straight from wartime slogans. Yet, despite its pedigree, the film bombed at the box office and quietly sank beneath cinematic waves. The story unfolds in claustrophobic intensity. A crippled bomber ditches at sea, leaving its crew stranded in a dinghy as time, weather, and enemy patrols close in. Meanwhile, RAF Air Sea Rescue launches a desperate mission to find them. It's tense, dramatic, and deeply human. But here's the kicker. 1950s. Audiences found it too bleak. Post-war Britain, still rationed and weary, didn't flock to theaters for grim reminders of wartime suffering. Rumors swirled that censors pushed for edits, uneasy with its unflinching portrayal of hopelessness. Some critics complained it offered too much saltwater and not enough heroics. Studio executives, sensing disaster, slashed the promotional budget, virtually dooming its run. Even Bogarde later remarked that it vanished faster than the tide. For decades, it remained a forgotten relic, overshadowed by livelier adventure films like The Dam Busters. Only in recent years, with restored prints and DVD releases, has it earned recognition as a masterclass in tension. Critics now praise its realism, noting how it honors the often overlooked air-sea rescue crews, whose heroism rarely made headlines. Its legacy reminds us of cinema's paradox. A brilliant story can drown if audiences aren't ready to confront its truth. The Sea Shall Not Have Them dared to show survival without glamour, sacrifice without glory. And that, perhaps, was its downfall, and its greatness. Number 10. Dunkirk, 1958. Today, we think of Dunkirk as Christopher Nolan's 2017 triumph. But back in 1958, Britain tried first. Directed by Leslie Norman and starring John Mills and Richard Attenborough, the film should have been a patriotic milestone. Instead, it limped through theaters, failing to capture the grand audience it deserved. The premise is breathtaking. Ordinary British civilians sailing into hell to rescue soldiers trapped on the beaches of France. Unlike later versions, this one balanced two perspectives: the frightened Tommies trudging through mud and fire, and the civilians who risked everything in their tiny boats. It was raw, honest, and distinctly un-Hollywood. And maybe that's why it stumbled. Some critics accused it of being too British, lacking the spectacle American audiences demanded. Rumors suggested studio executives feared its gritty tone. The beaches looked muddy and grim, not glorious. There were no sweeping musical triumphs or larger-than-life heroes. Instead, soldiers were terrified men, unsure if they'd survive the next shell. Production chaos didn't help. Budgets were stretched thin, forcing filmmakers to reuse extras and shoot in miserable weather that stalled schedules. Distribution abroad proved minimal, leaving it largely unseen outside the UK. By the 1960s, it was all but forgotten, eclipsed by more glamorous war films like The Longest Day. But here's the twist. Historians now argue it's one of the most accurate portrayals of Dunkirk ever filmed. Its refusal to sugarcoat the terror, its focus on ordinary people rather than generals, it feels decades ahead of its time. Watching it now, you sense the quiet dread of defeat turning into hope. A film that flopped because it told the truth too soon. Number 9. The One That Got Away, 1957. How does a film about Britain's enemies end up being one of its boldest wartime dramas? The One That Got Away dared to tell the story of Franz von Vera, the only German prisoner of war to escape British captivity during WWII. Starring Hardy Kruger, a German actor playing his own countryman, the film was bold, unsettling, and destined for trouble. Audiences were shocked. Why tell the story of a German escapee? Wasn't that glorifying the enemy? Critics accused it of poor taste, even treason. Rumors swirled that the War Office disliked its focus on British failure. Some theaters even refused to screen it, fearing public backlash. The controversy strangled its box office run. The story itself is riveting. Von Vera, charismatic and cunning, repeatedly escapes British custody, only to be recaptured, until he finally succeeds in Canada. The film portrays him not as a villain, but as a determined soldier. This humanization of the enemy was too radical for 1950s Britain. Audiences wanted stories of British bravery, not German triumph. Behind the scenes, Kruger faced hostility during production. Some veterans reportedly refused to cooperate, unwilling to assist a film they saw as pro-German. Yet his performance was mesmerizing, balancing charm with ruthless survival instinct. Director Roy Ward Baker fought to keep the tone balanced, but he couldn't overcome the storm. By the end of its short theatrical run, it had vanished from conversation. For decades, it was rarely shown on television, gathering dust in archives. Only later, with historical distance, did critics praise it as groundbreaking. A rare war film that dared to view conflict through enemy eyes. Its legacy lingers as both scandal and brilliance. It tanked because it was ahead of its time. And in daring to tell the other side, it whispered an uncomfortable truth. Humanity exists even in those we once called enemies. Number 8. The Colditz Story, 1955. When it premiered, The Colditz Story seemed guaranteed to succeed. Based on the best-selling memoir by Pat Reed, who had actually escaped from the infamous German POW fortress, the film was marketed as Britain's ultimate prison break thriller. It starred John Mills and Eric Portman, actors audiences trusted. Yet, despite its pedigree, the film underperformed, failing to ignite the box office the way producers had hoped. The story is inherently cinematic. Officers captured by the Nazis are locked away in the seemingly escape-proof Colditz Castle. What follows is a tense chess game between ingenious Allied prisoners and relentless German guards. Digging tunnels, forging documents, staging diversions, the film captures the thrilling creativity of survival. But here's the problem. It was too restrained. Critics complained it lacked fire and spectacle, presenting escape attempts almost like polite inconveniences rather than desperate struggles. Behind the scenes, producers faced fierce pressure from censors. Some escape details were allegedly toned down, out of fear they might encourage prison riots or inspire criminals. Others claim the War Office pushed for dignified restraint to avoid humiliating Germans in West Germany, then Britain's new ally during the Cold War. The result? A film too muted for audiences seeking thrills. Its muted reception meant it disappeared quickly from theaters. While The Great Escape, 1963, later became iconic for its action-packed Hollywood style, the Colditz Story was overshadowed, remembered only by enthusiasts. Yet historians argue its very restraint makes it unique. It reflected the quiet, grinding patience of real POW life. Today, it stands as a reminder that truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. A brilliant story, dulled by politics and timing, waiting decades for rediscovery. Number 7. Ill Met by Moonlight, 1957. This was the final collaboration of Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, the legendary duo behind The Red Shoes and Black Narcissus. Starring Dirk Bogarde, Ill Met by Moonlight told the daring true story of the British Special Operations Executive's audacious 1944 mission to kidnap German General Heinrich Kreipe on Crete. On paper, it should have been a box office hit. Instead, it fizzled into near obscurity. The mission itself was the stuff of legend. SOE operatives, disguised and desperate, ambush the German general, smuggle him across mountains, and hand him over to the Allies. It's one of WWII's boldest real-life exploits. The film should have sizzled. Yet critics called it flat, slow, and strangely bloodless. Rumors whispered that Powell and Pressburger had grown weary of war themes, delivering a film more dutiful than passionate. Censorship again loomed. Some historians claim the British government discouraged excessive glorification of sabotage, wary it might inspire insurgency in Britain's own fragile colonies. Others say Cold War politics made studios nervous about celebrating guerrilla tactics. Whatever the cause, the film was muted in tone and heavily cut before release. The public shrugged. Audiences craved spectacle and drama. Instead, they got long mountain marches and hushed conversations. Even Bogarde admitted later he found the role uninspired. Distribution was lukewarm, and the film quietly vanished. An unworthy farewell to one of cinema's greatest partnerships. Yet decades later, its understated tone feels almost radical. Rather than romanticizing war, it presents clandestine missions as grueling, exhausting slogs carried out by exhausted men. Its failure speaks to a culture that demanded fireworks when history offered only shadows. Today, Ill Met by Moonlight exists as both a historical document and a cinematic eulogy, marking the twilight of two masters, undone by politics, fatigue, and an audience not ready for their final whisper. Number 6. They Who Dare. 1954. On its release, They Who Dare promised high adventure. Directed by Louis Milestone, who had won an Oscar for All Quiet on the Western Front, and starring Dirk Bogarde and Denholm Elliott, it dramatized a daring British commando raid in the Greek islands. The mission: to destroy German airfields, crippling Allied efforts in the Mediterranean. Yet, despite its thrilling subject matter, the film collapsed at the box office. The premise had everything: stealth landings on moonlit beaches, silent knife fights, desperate escapes through rocky terrain. But here's the twist. The execution felt oddly sluggish. Critics complained it dragged when it should have soared. Some even accused it of resembling a travelogue more than a war film. with endless shots of sun-drenched landscapes instead of gritty combat. Controversy shadowed the production. Rumors swirled that Greek authorities objected to the depiction of local collaborators, forcing rewrites that dulled the story's edge. The War Office reportedly insisted on edits to avoid embarrassing details about failed British missions. In stripping away the harsher truths, the film lost its bite. Behind the scenes, Milestone clashed with producers over budget cuts, leading to inconsistent pacing and uneven performances. Bogart later dismissed it as one of his weakest films, a view audiences seemed to share. By the time it reached cinemas, enthusiasm had evaporated. But in hindsight, its failures are fascinating. The film dared to spotlight Britain's special forces, precursors to the SAS, long before they became popular subjects. And though clumsy, it captured the loneliness of men dropped behind enemy lines, cut off from rescue or recognition. They who dare tanked because it was stripped of its teeth. Yet, buried inside its flaws, lies a glimpse of the raw courage such missions demanded. Number 5. Appointment in London, 1953. This film had all the makings of a classic. Dirk Bogarde, once again, in the lead. A story about the brutal toll of flying countless bombing raids over Nazi Germany. Directed by Philip Leacock, Appointment in London dove into the psychological strain of RAF pilots pushed to the edge of endurance. Yet, despite strong reviews, it failed to connect with audiences and soon vanished from theaters. The plot follows Wing Commander Tim Mason, Bogarde, a man nearing the end of his required missions, but haunted by survivor's guilt. He wrestles with duty, fear, and the crushing weight of command. It's intimate, brooding, and painfully honest, qualities that clashed with audiences seeking either triumph or escapism. Rumors spread that censors pressured cuts to soften its depiction of psychological trauma. The Air Ministry reportedly bristled at its suggestion that pilots broke down under strain, fearing it dishonored the RAF. Critics admired its sincerity, but mainstream audiences labeled it too depressing. Post-war Britain wanted heroes, not haunted men with hollow eyes. Behind the scenes, the production was troubled by limited access to aircraft and airbases, forcing heavy reliance on stock footage. This, combined with muted marketing, further hurt its appeal. As Hollywood churned out glossy spectacles like 12 O'Clock High, this quieter, more British take stood no chance. Its legacy, however, has grown. Modern critics hail it as one of the earliest films to address PTSD in airmen, decades before the term existed. Its box office failure reveals a culture unwilling to confront the hidden costs of war. Watching it today, you see men not as symbols, but as souls cracking under pressure. And that truth, once rejected, now feels essential. Number 4. The Captive Heart, 1946. Released just a year after the war's end, The Captive Heart had all the elements of a critical darling. Directed by Basil Dearden and starring Michael Redgrave, it explored life inside a German POW camp, not through thrilling escapes, but through letters, longing, and the fragile connections prisoners clung to. The film was admired for its sincerity, but it stumbled financially, overshadowed by grander stories of victory. The premise centers on a Czech officer, masquerading as a captured British soldier, who forges letters to the wife of a dead comrade. Through these false words, an unlikely relationship grows, even as despair deepens inside the wire fences. Rather than showcasing barbed wire heroics, the film focused on yearning and loneliness. Audiences, still raw from real losses, found it too close to home. Censors reportedly pressed for softened portrayals of German guards, fearing a harsh depiction would sour post-war diplomacy. Some critics accused it of being too sentimental for a war film. Studios, nervous about marketing a movie about POWs without triumphant breakouts, gave it little push abroad. Behind the scenes, Dearden faced endless rewrites to balance realism with palatability. Redgrave himself reportedly doubted audiences were ready to confront grief on screen so soon after victory. He was right. While critics praised its humanity, ticket buyers stayed away. Today, however, the film's quiet bravery shines. It shows the war not as battles, but as an endless ache, fought with paper, ink, and stolen moments of hope. It flopped because it mourned too openly. But in that mourning lies its greatness. Number 3. The Wooden Horse. 1950. This film should have been Britain's answer to The Great Escape. Based on a true story, The Wooden Horse depicted Allied POWs tunneling to freedom beneath a gymnastics vaulting horse. It was ingenious, tense, and authentic. So authentic, in fact, that some of the real men who escaped advised the filmmakers. Yet, despite strong reviews, it earned only modest returns and quickly disappeared from public consciousness. The premise is almost unbelievable. Prisoners carry a wooden vaulting horse into the exercise yard each day, using it as cover while secretly digging a tunnel beneath. It's audacious, suspenseful, and meticulously detailed. But here's the twist. The film's very realism was its undoing. Audiences in 1950 wanted spectacle, not the painstaking grind of shovels scraping dirt. Whispers claimed censors trimmed escape details, worried criminals could copy them. Others suggest distributors gave it little international support, fearing Americans wouldn't connect to such a small story. And compared to glossier productions, its budget showed minimal sets, muted action, and understated performances. Behind the scenes, actors reportedly trained with former POWs to capture their routines, but critics dismissed it as too stiff. Ironically, that stiffness was deliberate. It mirrored the discipline of survival. Yet without Hollywood-style dramatics, it faded from memory. Today, film historians hail it as one of the most accurate POW escape films ever made. Its legacy is quiet but enduring, a story about courage carved from monotony, where triumph grew from patience rather than pyrotechnics. A box office disappointment, but an artistic landmark. Number 2. The Cruel Sea, 1953. This was supposed to be Britain's great naval epic. Adapted from Nicholas Montserrat's best-selling novel, The Cruel Sea told the harrowing story of a Royal Navy corvette battling U-boats across the Atlantic. Starring Jack Hawkins and Donald Sinden, it offered grit, tragedy, and survival. Critics applauded it. Yet, despite its pedigree, audiences were lukewarm, and it never achieved the commercial triumph expected. The film's premise was stark. Unlike glamorous submarine thrillers, The Cruel Sea showed endless gray waves, nerve-shredding sonar hunts, and sailors cracking under the grind. Its most infamous scene, when Captain Erickson orders depth charges dropped on his own men in the water to kill a lurking U-boat, was shocking for 1953. Some whispered it was too brutal, too unpatriotic. Censors nearly cut the scene entirely. Admiralty officials reportedly objected, arguing it painted the Navy as merciless. Studio executives feared backlash, but director Charles Friend fought to keep it in. Though the film survived with its integrity intact, controversy left a stain. Some theaters even avoided screening it in naval towns. Behind the scenes, budget constraints hampered production. Real ships were scarce, forcing awkward model shots that critics mocked as unconvincing. Despite strong performances, some reviewers called it unrelentingly bleak. And post-war audiences, still rationed and weary, weren't lining up to relive the Atlantic convoys. Yet, in hindsight, The Cruel Sea is perhaps the finest British naval film ever made. It flopped commercially because it dared to tell the truth. War at sea was endless, merciless, and gray. Today, its honesty feels prophetic, a masterpiece sunk by the very cruelty it depicted. Number 1. Went the Day Well? 1942. At the top of our list is a film that was both daring and dangerous. Went the Day Well was released at the height of the war, directed by Alberto Cavalcanti, and presented a shocking what-if. German paratroopers disguised as British soldiers seize a small English village. It was part propaganda, part nightmare. Critics admired it, but audiences, unsettled by its terror, stayed away. The premise is chilling. Ordinary villagers slowly realize their guests are invaders. What follows is a brutal struggle. Churchyards turned into battlegrounds, neighbors betrayed, women and children caught in the crossfire. For 1942, it was almost too much. Whispers spread that the Ministry of Information itself debated banning it, fearing panic. Some theaters reportedly refused to show it, worried it would demoralize rural audiences. Behind the scenes, production was fraught. Allegedly, script drafts were softened to emphasize British resistance, but Cavalcanti still slipped in shocking moments. Villagers executed, children threatened. Critics were startled by its darkness, questioning whether such imagery should be shown in wartime. The film's muted reception meant it quietly slipped away. For decades, it remained a cult curiosity, known only to historians. Only in recent years, through restored prints and re-evaluation, has it been celebrated as a masterpiece of wartime paranoia. Its legacy is haunting. It tanked because it told a story too terrifyingly plausible. But that's what makes it brilliant. In its fictional invasion, it revealed the fear that gripped Britain, that the war might land in their backyards, turning neighbors into soldiers and innocents into battlefield. These 12 films remind us that brilliance doesn't always bring success. They flopped, faltered, or were buried by fear. But each holds truths audiences weren't ready to face. From quiet grief to brutal honesty, they captured the shadows of WWII in ways still powerful today. Which of these forgotten gems will you seek out? Like, subscribe, and share your pick.